Isn't it odd that those who call themselves men of God, those in charge of the temple and the synagogues, those who were supposed to be the pastors and the priests and the bishops and the rabbis, the popish leaders of our Messiah's time, those who were standing behind the pulpits of his time, were the very men who were found to be the arch enemies of our Messiah and the God of Israel? It was these same leaders, these same scribes and these rabbinical Pharisees that our Messiah called twofold children of hell. Those who stood behind the pulpits of our Messiah's time were those who our Messiah said would cross over sea and land to make one follower. And when that person had become a follower, they had made him twice as much a child of hell as themselves. It was these so-called men of God that had our Messiah whipped and beaten and scourged and mocked and scorned and humiliated and even murdered. What is the key to the book of Revelation? What was God showing his chosen, set-apart people from the very beginning? Why is it written that God shows us the end from the beginning? What did he want us to know about these last days, and why? Is it the mark of the beast that we should be on the lookout for? Or is there something even more dangerous, something more cunning, something even more wicked, that is not only soon coming upon the earth, but has been lurking in the shadows of history for generations? What is it? What is the key to revelation that has been laid out before us in riddles and rhymes? And what is it that we should be preparing for? Do you know? Or do you think that you know? For those of us who are beginning to sit up and to take notice of what's happening all around us, the world today in 2022 seems almost Orwellian when compared to what the world was just a few generations ago. Almost every prophecy given to us by our Messiah in the 24th chapter of the book of Matthew is clearly being established today in our time. Wars and rumors of wars, nation rising against nation and kingdom rising against kingdom, famines and earthquakes in various places, all seem to be the norm today in our time. And along with that, we can also throw in volcanoes, tsunamis, asteroids and meteors, sinkholes, tornadoes and hurricanes, flooding and wildfires, animal die-offs, and a whole gamut of groanings that are continuously coming from the earth today. As we sit in the middle of a worldwide pandemic, and what many are now saying is the onset of a worldwide famine, along with what may be a possible economic collapse, the dimensions of which the world has never seen before, many people are now beginning to turn back to that dusty old Bible sitting on their coffee tables for answers that can only be found within the pages of our God-breathed Scripture. Today in our time, the most important thing that we as true God-fearing, Messiah-following, cross-bearing Christians can do is to understand the prophecies given to us within the confines of our God-breathed Scripture. The book of Revelation, which seems to many to be a book of riddles and rhymes, teaches those who have the eyes to see and the ears to hear what must take place before the return of our Messiah can come. He warned us diligently of a beast that would arise from the sea, a beast that would be a controlling beast, a manipulating beast, a beast full of signs and wonders, a beast arrayed in purple and scarlet, a beast who would be drunk on the blood of the martyrs of our Messiah, a beast that would ultimately become the arch enemy of true God-fearing, Messiah-following, cross-bearing Christians, and the beast that our Messiah speaks of in the book of Revelation, and that the prophets all pointed directly to, only fits one entity on the face of the earth today. And this one entity is perfectly described by both Daniel in the book of Daniel and by our Messiah in the book of Revelation down to a proverbial T. And this beast is not on the horizon, as many suspect, but is already here and has been lurking in the shadows of the world for centuries, setting the nations of the world up for a most wonderfully wicked deception that will, and already has in many cases, indeed fooled, if possible, even the very elect. One of the first things that needs to be understood is who it was that had a major hand in our Messiah's crucifixion. The Pharisees and the scribes, who were the men that were standing behind the pulpits of our Messiah's time, were the culprits who ultimately wanted him dead. But we must remember that it wasn't only the men standing behind the pulpits of our Messiah's time that had a hand in his crucifixion, but it was also the political machine at that time that actually did the dirty work. It was, without a doubt, a culmination of both church and state that had murdered our Messiah. But before we move forward, it's important that we sit up and take note of the fact that it was indeed Roman power that literally crucified our Messiah with their own hands. We must remember that it was the power of Rome that tried to murder our Messiah through King Herod when he was just a child. And it was the power of Rome that had ultimately made the decision to crucify our Messiah. And although it was not only the decision of Roman power that had made the decision to crucify our Messiah, it was indeed the actual hands of Roman power that nailed his hands and his feet to the cross. It was also Rome that placed a seal on his tomb in order to prevent his resurrection. And it was even Roman power that stood outside of his tomb in order to prevent his body from going anywhere within the 3-day period that our Messiah himself had given as a timeline for his actual resurrection. And so there were two main entities that had the largest hand in crucifying our Messiah. And that was the men who were standing behind the pulpits of his time, the religious power of the rabbinical Pharisees and scribes, and Rome, who was the political power of that time. Today in our time, strangely enough, we have a man on earth today who represents both of these entities. He represents the men standing behind the pulpits of our time through religious power, and he also sits atop a nation, giving him political power as well. A nation that has risen up through the auspices of Roman power. And what's even more striking is that the same man also claims the Roman title of Pontifex Maximus, which is indeed a Roman title given to a Roman Caesar, because once again, it was indeed through Roman power that this man and the power that he holds today was birthed from. Long ages ago, when Rome through the neglect of the Western emperors was left to the mercy of the barbarous hordes, the Romans turned to one figure for aid and protection, and asked him to rule them. And thus commenced the temporal sovereignty of the popes. And meekly stepping to the throne of Caesar, the vicar of Christ took up the scepter to which the emperors and kings of Europe were to bow in reverence through so many ages. American Catholic Quarterly Review, April 1911. This one man that is indeed with us today in our time rules the smallest nation on the earth, which not only represents his political power, but also his religious power as well. And this man who holds both religious and political power is unique in the fact that he is the only one on earth who holds such a power. He is indeed different from all the rest. And both the religious and political power that this man holds has been spun like a web throughout the whole earth. And her army of Jesuit priests have mesmerized even presidents and prime ministers around the world, who come each and every year to Vatican City to see this little horn power. And it is this little horn power that even today in our time proclaims to be above the God of heaven and earth, a lawless son of destruction who exalts himself high and far above every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the hearts of God's people, proclaiming himself to be God. Then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great prostitute who is seated on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality, and with the wine of whose sexual immorality the dwellers on earth have become drunk." And he carried me away in the Spirit into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was full of blasphemous names, and it had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and jewels and pearls, holding in her hand a golden cup, full of abominations and the impurities of her sexual immorality. And on her forehead was written a name of mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of prostitutes and of earth's abominations. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints, the blood of the martyrs of Yeshua. When I saw her, I marveled greatly. But the angel said to me, "Why do you marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast with the 7 heads and the 10 horns that carries her. The beast that you saw was and is not, and is about to rise from the bottomless pit and go to destruction. And the dwellers on earth whose names have not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world will marvel to see the beast, because it was and is not, and is to come. This calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman is seated. They are also 7 kings, 5 of whom have fallen, 1 is, the other has not yet come. And when he does come, he must remain only a little while. As for the beast that was and is not, it is an 8th, but it belongs to the 7, and it goes to destruction. And the 10 horns that you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received royal power, but they are to receive authority as kings for 1 hour together with the beast. These are of one mind, and they hand over their power and authority to the beast. They will make war on the Lamb, and the Lamb will conquer them. For he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and those with him are called and chosen and faithful. And the angel said to me, "The waters that you saw where the prostitute is seated are peoples and multitudes and nations and languages. And the 10 horns that you saw, they and the beast will hate the prostitute. They will make her desolate and naked, and devour her flesh and burn her up with fire. For God has put it into their hearts to carry out his purpose by being of one mind and handing over their royal power to the beast and until the words of God are fulfilled. And the woman that you saw is the great city that has dominion over the kings of the earth. What's important to keep in context is that in the book of Revelation chapter 13 at the end of the Bible, we read about two very important beasts that will appear on the world stage at the end of the age. Two very important beasts that are separate from one another, and yet, at the same time, are indeed joined at the hip, you might say. And I saw a beast rising out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 diadems on its horns and blasphemous names on its heads. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard. Its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. And to it the dragon gave his power and his throne and great authority. In order to understand this beast that John saw rising out of the sea, we must first better understand the 4 major kingdoms that the Bible prophesied would come, because these beasts represent the major kingdoms throughout history that would rule over the world over time. And to better understand these 4 major kingdoms, we need to go back and better understand the 2nd chapter of the book of Daniel. In the book of Daniel, chapter 2, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon has a dream of an image, and this image was like a man whose head was gold, his chest and arms made of silver, its middle and thighs made of bronze, and its legs were made of iron. And the feet of this giant image were partially made of iron and partially made of clay. Upon which time King Nebuchadnezzar sees a great stone that strikes the image on its feet of iron and clay, and breaks them into pieces, bringing the whole image down in one swift strike. Daniel tells King Nebuchadnezzar that the head of gold is King Nebuchadnezzar himself, but that another king inferior to himself would indeed rise up after him. And furthermore, a 3rd kingdom of bronze would rise after that. And this 3rd bronze kingdom would rule over all of the earth as well. And then Daniel begins to tell King Nebuchadnezzar about a 4th kingdom that is as strong as iron, because iron breaks to pieces and shatters all things. And like iron that crushes, it shall break and crush all things. And so it's important for us to keep this 4th kingdom in mind, because it will be this 4th kingdom that breaks into pieces and crushes all things that will ultimately rule the world in some form or fashion at the end of the age. And Daniel then goes on to tell King Nebuchadnezzar that the feet and toes of this image were mixed with iron and clay, which means that clay will not hold fast to this iron kingdom. This clay in some form or fashion, although will seem to be part of the iron kingdom, will not hold firmly to this iron kingdom entirely, and it will not entirely become part of the iron kingdom. Daniel then continues on to tell King Nebuchadnezzar that what this represents is that the kingdom of iron shall become partly strong and partly brittle. Clearly, this represents the 2nd beast found in the book of Revelation that would rise up not from the sea, but this time from the land, that would ultimately become the image of the 1st beast, but will not entirely be married to it. And Daniel tells King Nebuchadnezzar that the iron mixed with the clay will mix with one another in marriage, but even though they are mixed in marriage, they will not hold together, just as iron does not mix with clay. And Daniel goes on to tell King Nebuchadnezzar that it is when all of these things take place that the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall this final kingdom be left to another people. And that this one kingdom that the God of heaven will set up will break in pieces all these other kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it will be God's kingdom that will ultimately stand forever. And in Daniel chapter 2, verse 45, Daniel explains to King Nebuchadnezzar that the stone that was cut from a mountain by no human hand would break into pieces the iron and the clay and the bronze and the silver and the gold that came before it. What we find here in the book of Daniel is a prophetical depiction of the kingdoms of the world that would come before the end of the age. The world up until this point in time has been through these other three kingdoms and beast nations. But in the 13th chapter of the book of Revelation, we're introduced to one of two last beasts that will appear at the end of the age. And it's extremely important for us to understand who this first beast is and what it represents. Because this first beast is a culmination of what we've just read in the book of Daniel. The first beast mentioned in Revelation chapter 13 clearly represents the little horn power of Daniel's fourth beast. If we'll notice in Daniel chapter 7, one of the major characteristics of the little horn power is that it will speak blasphemy against the Most High God of Israel. And when we read about the beast in Revelation chapter 13, we see once again this beast speaks blasphemy against the Most High God of Israel. This first beast in the book of Revelation represents the culmination of nations that had come before it, much like Daniel's fourth beast, because it was indeed Rome that had ultimately conquered and ruled over all of these other nations. The 13th chapter of the book of Revelation points directly to both a religious and a national political power that would indeed eventually be given power over all of the earth. And if we'll remember correctly, it was a culmination of both church and state that had crucified our Messiah. It was the men standing behind the pulpits of his time, along with Roman power, that had ultimately crucified him. This beast in the future will also represent both church and state, which is exactly what will make it different from all of the other kings of the nations. It will hold both religious and political power. We must remember that at the time of this dream that was given to King Nebuchadnezzar, the kingdom that was already ruling at that time was indeed Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom of Babylon, which represented the gold head of the statue of this dream. The silver portion of Nebuchadnezzar's statue represented Medo-Persia, which ruled after Babylon in 538 BC. The bronze portion of the statue represented Greece, who had conquered Medo-Persia in 331 BC. And the iron legs represented Rome, who conquered Greece in 168 BC. And the feet represent the United States, who is the second beast of Revelation chapter 13, who eventually does become the image of the first beast because of the influence and infiltration of the first beast, which we'll talk about later as we move forward. The winged lion of Babylon has always been well known throughout antiquity as a representation of Babylon. And Babylon was the most powerful and richest nation on the face of the earth back in the days of King Nebuchadnezzar. Wings in the Bible represent speed. Babylon had grown up quickly out of the dust of the earth to become the largest kingdom on the face of the earth at that time. But those wings would soon be plucked off of that great lion, which was represented by King Nebuchadnezzar. In chapter 4 of the book of Daniel, we read about King Nebuchadnezzar being taken off of his throne and turned into a beast by the decree of the Watchers because of his narcissism and his vanity against God. But after 7 years of roaming the fields as a beast, King Nebuchadnezzar, after learning how to humble himself, was restored to a man that once again praised and honored the Elohim of heaven. But after Babylon came Medo-Persia in 583 BC, which is who the bear of Revelation chapter 13 represents. The bear was raised up on one side to represent the fact that Persia was stronger than the Medes. These two powers, the Medes and the Persians, were allied together in their dominion of the earth. The three ribs in the bear's mouth most likely symbolize the three providences that the kingdoms took over, which were Babylon, Lydia, and Egypt. The next kingdom to rise was indeed Greece, which represents the leopard. The spots of the leopard obviously denote the many different Greek gods and myths of gods that have been propagated by Greece even to this very day. Alexander the Great had taken over the world in a fairly short amount of time. The four wings of the leopard in Daniel's vision make note of the exceeding speed with which Alexander the Great had subdued the nations. It only took Alexander the Great 8 years to completely take over the entire world, And then it was written that he sat down to weep because there were no more worlds to conquer. Which brings us to 168 BC and the downfall of the Grecian Empire and the fourth beast or kingdom that was prophesied by Daniel, which has everything to do with the first beast of Revelation chapter 13. The fourth kingdom to rise was indeed the iron monarchy of Rome. The cruel domination of the earth by Rome has been well documented throughout the pages of ancient history, along with her persecution of true God-fearing, cross-bearing, Messiah-following Christians. In 476 AD, 10 fierce tribes of people known as the Anglo-Saxons, the Almonati, the Heruli, the Vandals, the Ostrogoths, the Visigoths, the Suevi, the Lombards, the Burgundians, and the Franks all came sweeping down from the North Country and overwhelmed the territory of Western Europe. And thus, Rome was indeed divided into 10 different parts, and they became 10 kings. 7 of those kingdoms have grown into modern nations and have survived on the map of Europe as significant 20th century powers today in our time. But 3 of them disappeared from the world stage, and we'll talk about them in just a few minutes. In both the book of Revelation and the book of Daniel, there is what is known as a little horn that symbolizes a little king who rises up from this group of 10 kings, speaking blasphemy against the God of heaven. The attributes of this blasphemous little horn will carry on from Daniel chapter 7 on into Revelation chapter 13, and we'll see that as we move forward. But the first thing that we need to understand is what makes this little horn, this political entity, different from all other political entities of the earth. What are the attributes that make it so different? Once again, the answer to that question can be found in Daniel chapter 7, verse 25 that we just read. The attributes that make this little horn different than all of the other political leaders of the world is that this little horn shall speak words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and shall think to change the times and the law of God. And I want to stop right here for just a moment, and I want to ask, who was it that originally changed the times and the law of God? Did the Roman Catholic Church and her popery change the times? What calendar do we keep today? Today we keep the Gregorian calendar that was put forth by Pope Gregory XIII in his papal bull Gravisimus, which was published in 1582. Today in our time we keep a Roman Catholic created calendar, which is a far cry from God's biblical calendar. Has the Roman Catholic Empire changed the times? You bet she has. It's by her twisted calendar that the world sets her clock today. And it is by her twisted calendar that the times of God have indeed been changed just as Daniel had prophesied that they would be. And by changing the times, this blasphemous little horn has also changed the law of God as well, and has literally wiped his feast days, appointments, and Sabbaths off of the world's calendar completely. God's months are no longer God's months, according to this Roman Catholic created calendar. Jehovah God's appointments and all of his precepts have all literally been wiped out by this blasphemous little horn power, who once again holds both political and religious power around the world. Knowing and understanding these things, why in the world would a church that claims to be Christian think to change the times and the law of God? Why would anyone claiming to be a Christian do that? I would submit to you that the only reason that someone would do this is for the exact same reason that they would proclaim the first day of the week, Sunday, to be the Sabbath, and not the seventh day of God to be the Sabbath. It is only Roman Catholic popery that is proclaimed for herself a first day of the week, Sunday Sabbath. No one anywhere within the confines of the 66 books of our Bibles has anyone ever commanded anyone to keep holy the first day of the week and to call it the Sabbath day of God. It is the law of God that is the very seal of God upon his people. And it is this law that is the spoken word of God that was long ago promised to be written across our hearts and in our minds. This is the new covenant, according to both the book of Jeremiah in the Old Testament and the book of Hebrews in the New Testament.
Jeremiah chapter 31. For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares Jehovah. I will put my law within them, and I will write it on their hearts, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Hebrews chapter 10. This is the covenant that I will make with them after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my laws on their hearts and write them on their minds. Then, he adds, I will remember their sins and their lawless deeds no more.
This is the very seal of God that is placed upon his disciples, that is symbolically written in their minds and across their hearts.
Proverbs chapter 7. My son, keep my words and treasure up my commandments with you. Keep my commandments and live. Keep my teachings as the apple of your eye. Bind them on your fingers, write them on the tablet of your heart.
Which brings us to the sign of the authority of the one true Elohim of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. What is the sign of the authority of the one true Most High God of heaven and earth?
Jeremiah chapter 10. But Yahovah is the true God. He is the living God and the everlasting King. At his wrath the earth quakes, and the nations cannot endure his indignation. Thus you shall say to them, the gods who did not make the heavens and the earth shall perish from the earth and from under the heavens. It is he who made the earth by his power, who established the world by his wisdom, and by his understanding stretched out the heavens. Psalms chapter 96. For all the gods of the people are worthless idols, but Yahovah made the heavens. Isaiah chapter 40. To whom then will you compare me, that I should be like him, says the Holy One? Lift up your eyes on high and see who created these. He who brings out their host by number, calling them all by name, by the greatness of his might, and because he is strong in power. Not one is missing.
It is upon the very fact that Yahovah God himself created the heavens and the earth and all things seen and unseen that he establishes his authority. It is because he has created all things, seen and unseen, that his authority has indeed been established, and those who acknowledge that authority are indeed marked with a sign.
Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the seventh day God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all of his work that he had done in creation.
This very seal of God can be found within the law of God. And it is in fact listed within his testimony as the fourth commandment found in Exodus chapter 20, where it's written to remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy. The seventh-day Sabbath is indeed a sign, a mark, if you will, that marks his people as his people. And it is this seventh-day Sabbath that distinguishes all other people and all other gods as separate and apart from the one true Elohim of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Moreover, I gave them my Sabbaths as a sign between me and them, that they might know that I am Yahovah, who sanctifies them.
Let there be no mistake about it. The keeping of the seventh-day Sabbath of Yahovah God himself is what marks his people as his chosen, set-apart remnant people. This seventh day of the work week has been made holy by him, and it has been sanctified by him, and it has been established as a sign by him and by him alone. And those who keep any other so-called Sabbath day, a different day that has been created by men and their make-believe gods, will clearly not be counted as his people who keep his chosen, holy, sanctified seventh-day Sabbath that verifies the fact that his people know that it was he who created the heavens and the earth and all things seen and unseen. Today, the mark, the very seal of God himself, has been challenged by the Pope of Rome, who has made for himself his own first day of the week, Sunday Sabbath, that he himself calls his own mark. And if you still think that it was not Roman Catholicism that has established the false first day of the week, Sunday Sabbath, I challenge you to hear what history clearly proclaims to the world.
The Roman Emperor Constantine, a convert to Christianity, introduced the first civil legislation concerning Sunday in 321 AD, when he decreed that all work should cease on that day except that farmers could work if necessary. The law aimed at providing time for worship was followed later in the same century and in subsequent centuries by further restrictions on Sunday activities. The Encyclopedia Britannica. In outward act, we do the same as yourselves in this matter. We too no longer observe the Sabbath, but Sunday in its stead. But there is this important difference between us, that we do not pretend as you do to derive our authority for so doing from a book, the Bible, but we, Catholics, derive it from a living teacher, and that teacher is the Roman Catholic Church. Moreover, we believe that not everything which God would have us to know and to do is written in the Bible, but that there is also an unwritten Word of God, the Pope's Word, which we are bound to believe and to obey. We Catholics then have precisely the same authority for keeping Sunday holy instead of Saturday as we have for every other article of our creed, namely, the authority of the Church of the living God and ground of truth. Whereas, you who are Protestants have really no authority for it, speaking of Sunday Sabbath. Whatever, for there is no authority for it in the Bible, and you will not allow that there can be authority for it anywhere else. But you and we do in fact follow Roman Catholic tradition in this matter, but we follow it believing it to be part of God's Word, and the Roman Catholic Church to be its divinely appointed guardian and interpreter. You follow it, Catholicism, denouncing it all the time as a fallible and treacherous guide which often makes the commandment of God of none effect. Why don't you keep holy the Sabbath day? Pages 3 through 15 in the Clifton Tracts, Volume 4, published by the Roman Catholic Church. The Bible everywhere enforces the sanctification of Saturday, the seventh day of the week. You Protestants have to admit the authority of the Roman Catholic Church that is branded on you when you observe Sunday, because you have no other authority for Sunday but that of the Roman Catholic Church. James Cardinal Gibbons. Reason and sense demand the acceptance of one or the other of these alternatives, either the keeping holy of Saturday or Catholicity and the keeping holy of Sunday. Compromise is impossible. James Cardinal Gibbons, The Catholic Mirror, December 23, 1893. Nowhere in the Bible is it stated that worship should be changed from Saturday to Sunday. Now the Church, instituted by God's authority, Sunday as the day of worship. This same Church, by the same divine authority, taught the doctrine of purgatory long before the Bible was made. We have, therefore, the same authority for purgatory as we have for Sunday. Martin J. Scott, Things Catholics Are Asked About, page 136, 1927. There is but one church on the face of the earth which has the power, or claims power, to make laws binding on the conscience, binding before God, binding under penalty of hellfire. For instance, the institution of Sunday. What right has any other church to keep this day? You answer by virtue of the third commandment. The papacy renamed the fourth commandment, calling it the third, which says, "Remember that thou keep holy the Sabbath day." But Sunday is not the Sabbath. Any schoolboy knows that Sunday is the first day of the week. I have repeatedly offered $1,000 to anyone who will prove by the Bible alone that Sunday is the day we are bound to keep, and no one has called for the money. It was the Holy Catholic Church that changed the day of rest from Saturday, the seventh day, to Sunday, the first day of the week. Thomas Enright, CSSR, in a lecture delivered in 1893. As for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom 10 kings shall arise, and another shall arise after them. He shall be different from the former ones, and shall put down 3 kings. He shall speak words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and shall think to change the times and the laws. And they shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and a half of time.
In Daniel chapter 7, Daniel tells us of a vision that he has containing 4 different beasts. Each one of these beasts represents a kingdom that basically ruled the world at a different time throughout history. When Daniel gets down to the 4th beast that he's describing, Daniel mentions this blasphemous little horn power that will raise up from amongst the 10 other kings that were seen as horns, and will ultimately have dominion over the earth in one form or fashion or the other. When Daniel explains to us the attributes of this 4th beast, he makes mention of a little horn that will rise up from this 4th beast. This little horn power is the beast that John writes about in the 13th chapter of the book of Revelation, and we'll see that as we move forward. But Daniel tells us that this little horn that will rise up from the 4th beast will be able to be identified by 2 very specific signs. Number 1, he will be different than all of the other kings, the other 10 kings that he was raised up amongst. And number 2, he will speak blasphemy against the Most High God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We already know that the Roman Catholic papacy is different from all other kings of the earth, because the papacy not only rules over the church and her own homegrown version of what she calls Christianity, but she also rules over a nation the size of a small city, which gives the papacy not only religious power, but also diplomatic and political power as well, making the papacy a kingship that is indeed different from all others that she was raised up from amongst. And the blasphemy that she speaks against the Most High God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob literally knows no bounds.
The Pope is not simply the representative of Jesus Christ. On the contrary, he is Jesus Christ himself, under the veil of the flesh, and who by means of a being common to humanity continues his ministry among men. Does the Pope speak? It is Jesus Christ who is speaking. Does he teach? It is Jesus Christ who teaches. Does he confer grace or pronounce an anathema? It is Jesus Christ himself who is pronouncing the anathema and conferring the grace. Hence, consequently, when one speaks of the Pope, it is not necessary to examine, but to obey.
There must be no limiting the bounds of the command in order to suit the purpose of the individual whose obedience is demanded. There must be no cavilling at the declared will of the Pope, and so invest it with quite another than that which he has put upon it. No preconceived opinions must be brought to bear upon it. No rights must be set up against the rights of the Holy Father. To teach and command his decisions are not to be criticized, or his ordinances disputed. Therefore, by divine ordination, all, no matter how august the person may be, whether he wear a crown, or be invested with the purple, or be clothed in the sacred vestments, all must be subject to him who has had all things put under him. Evangelical Christendom, January 1st, 1895, page 15, published in London by J.S. Phillips. The Pope is of so great dignity and so exalted that he is not a mere man, but as it were, God, and the Vicar of God. Ferraris Ecclesiastical Dictionary. The Pope is of so great dignity and so exalted that he is not a mere man. He is, as it were, God on earth, sole sovereign of the faithful of Christ, chief of kings, having plenitude of power. Lucius Ferraris, Prompta Bibliotheca, 1763, Volume 6, Papa 2, pages 25 through 29. Hence the Pope is crowned with a triple crown, as King of heaven and of earth and of lower regions. Lucius Ferraris, Prompta Bibliotheca, 1763, Volume 6, Papa 2, page 26. The Pope is not only the representative of Jesus Christ, he is Jesus Christ himself, hidden under the veil of flesh. Catholic National, July, 1895. We define that the Holy Apostolic See, the Vatican, and the Roman Pontiff hold the primacy over the whole world. Decree of the Council of Trent, quoted in Philippi Lab and Gabriel Cosart, the Most Holy Councils. To make war against the Pope is to make war against God, seeing the Pope is God, and God is the Pope. Moreri's History. It is quite certain that the popes have never approved or rejected this title, Lord God the Pope, for the passage in the gloss referred to appears in the edition of the canon law published in Rome in 1580 by Gregory XIII. Father A. Pereira. The Pope and God are the same, so he has all power in heaven and earth. Pope Pius V, quoted in Barclay, chapter 27, page 218, cities Petrus, Bartanius. The leader of the Catholic Church is defined by the faith as the Vicar of Jesus Christ. The Pope is considered the man on earth who takes the place of the second person of the omnipotent God of the Trinity. John Paul II, Crossing the Threshold of Hope, page 3, 1994. Now the Scriptures alone do not contain all the truths which a Christian is bound to believe, because they do not contain all the truths necessary for salvation. Cardinal James Gibbons, Faith of Our Fathers, page 108. The supremacy of the Bible as source of faith is unhistorical, illogical, fatal to the virtue of faith, and destructive to unity. New Advent Catholic Encyclopedia, under the term Protestantism. And the king shall do as he wills. He shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak astonishing things against the God of gods. He shall prosper till the indignation is accomplished, for what is decreed shall be done. The truth of the matter is that this beast written about by the prophets and the Apostle John in the book of Revelation has been well known for generations. All of the reformers and the authors of the first translated Bibles that finally hit the printing presses after 1455 all pointed to Roman Catholicism and her popery as being the infamous beast of the end of the age, and most certainly as Antichrist. Today in our time, it's extremely important that we understand exactly who this little horn is that comes with the eyes and the mouth of a man, speaking blasphemy against the God of heaven. This little horn that would wear out the saints of the Most High and think to change the times and the law of the Most High is extremely important to identify today in our time. And what's so ironic is that he is not difficult to identify by any means. One of the first things that we're told about this little horn is that he would have both the eyes and the mouth of a man. Therefore, this little horn does indeed represent a man. A man that will stand upon the earth having the power to wear out the saints and the power to think to change the times and the law of the God of heaven and earth. This man speaking blasphemies against God, this man who would exalt himself above and beyond all other gods and all other religions, this man that would think to change the times and the law of God, this man has already come. And what he has already accomplished today in our time is monumentally important to understand if we're going to understand where this new one world religion, this new one world order is going to be hatched forth from at the end of the age. What is also important for us to understand is that it is written that this little horn would come up among the 10 other horns, which places this little horn geographically in Western Europe, where the other 10 horns, which represent the 10 nations that Rome was broken into, were born. And because the other 10 horns arose in 476 AD, the little horn would have to have begun its reign sometime after that date. And once again, we're told in Daniel chapter 7, verse 24, that when this little horn raises up, it will put down 3 other kings. The Roman papacy came into fruition in 538 AD through a decree of Emperor Justinian that went into effect and assigned absolute preeminence to the Church of Rome. And once again, these are historical facts that can be verified by any authoritative historical source. When the papacy arose, it was opposed by 3 of the tribes that had taken over at the collapse of the Roman Empire, dividing it into 10 different sections. The Vandals, the Ostrogoths, and the Heruli were Arian powers that opposed the rise of the Roman Catholic Church, at which time the armies of the Roman Catholic Church marched in and uprooted and completely destroyed these 3 tribes or these 3 kings. All 3 of them were destroyed in the very year of 538 AD, when Justinian's decree had gone on into effect, once again giving the Church of Rome and her papacy absolute preeminence. What we have here in the book of Daniel are 9 specific characteristics of exactly who this 4th beast of Daniel chapter 7 is, which represents one of the last powers on earth. And what's important to realize is that this 4th beast that Daniel is speaking of relates directly to the 1st beast that John is speaking of in the 13th chapter of the book of Revelation. The little horn power is what rises up and rules the beast, and this little horn power is represented in Revelation chapter 13. Everything that we see here in Daniel chapter 7 directly corresponds to the beast that we see in Revelation chapter 13. But in order to be absolutely certain in our identification of this first beast, and in order to be able to identify exactly who this little horn power is, we need to make note of the 9 different characteristics that Daniel gives us to identify this little horn. Because by using these 9 attributes to identify the little horn power, We will soon see that these 9 attributes can only point to one man on earth and one power on earth that is already here among us. As we've already shown, the Pope of Rome and his power has indeed come up amongst the 10 kings that Rome was split into. And we've already seen that the Pope of Rome did indeed rise up after these 10 kings. We've also seen that it was indeed the papacy and her Roman power that destroyed 3 of the 10 kings, who were once again the Vandals, the Ostrogoths, and the Heruli. We also know that this little horn would indeed be a man. Not many men, mind you, but a man who would have the eyes and the mouth of a man to speak blasphemy against God. And we also know that this little horn would be diverse from the other horns or kings which the papacy is, due to the fact that she's not only a religious power, but that she is also a political power who is still indeed, to this very day, the head of what is left of Rome, and still carries with her the title of Pontifex Maximus, a title only given to a Roman Caesar.
The popes fulfilled the place of the vacant emperors at Rome, inheriting their power, prestige, and titles from paganism. Constantine left all to the Bishop of Rome. The papacy is but the ghost of the deceased Roman Empire sitting crowned upon its grave. Stanley's History, page 40.
And of course we also know that the Pope of Rome continuously blasphemes the Bible itself. And it's not only the times of God that she has destroyed by creating her own calendar and by doing away with God's appointments and feast days, but she has also destroyed the laws of God through her demonically inspired Jesuit army that has infiltrated every single country on the face of the earth. It is through her Jesuit colleges and her Jesuit schools and her Jesuit healthcare systems and her Jesuit political leaders and her Jesuit-controlled Roman Catholic religious system that she has entwined herself not only within the political powers of the world, but also the religious powers of the world. And it is through her Jesuit army that she has amassed more power than any other nation on the face of the earth. And this is exactly why all of the kings and queens and presidents and prime ministers of the whole earth come running to her each and every year. Her intelligence is greater than the FBI, the CIA, the Secret Service, MI5, Mossad, or any other intelligence gathering agency in the world. The power that she wields over the kingdoms of the earth is indeed something to be in awe of. She had even infiltrated the Protestant churches of the United States clear back in the days of Washington and Lincoln. And she has also infiltrated the Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, Skull and Bones, Bohemian Grove, the Bilderbergs, and even the Rothschilds. She is well aware of how to wield her power and how to blackmail and how to coerce and how to unseat even the most powerful of men from office.
I do not pretend to be a prophet, but though not a prophet, I see a very dark cloud on the horizon, and that cloud is coming from Rome. It is filled with tears of blood. It will rise and increase till its flanks will be torn by a flash of lightning, followed by a fearful peal of thunder. Then a cyclone such as the world has never seen will pass over the country, spreading ruin and desolation from the north to the south. After it's over, there will be long days of peace and prosperity, for popery, with its Jesuits and merciless Inquisition, will have been forever swept away from our country. Neither I nor you, but our children will see these things. 50 Years in the Church of Rome, by Charles Chiniquy, page 700.
115. If the liberties of the American people are ever destroyed, they will fall by the hand of the Roman Catholic cult's clergy. General Lafayette, under President George Washington. Within 20 years, this country is going to rule the world. Kings and emperors will soon pass away, and the democracy of the United States will take their place. When the United States rules the world, the Catholic Church will rule the world. Nothing can stand against the Church. I'd like to see the politicians who would try to rule against the Church in Chicago. His reign would be short indeed. Roman Catholic Archbishop James E. Quigley, Chicago Daily Tribune, May 5th, 1903. No, the Catholic Church will not descend into the tomb. It will survive the empire. At length, a second empire will arise, and of this empire the Pope will be the master. More than this, he will be the master of Europe. He will dictate his orders to kings who will obey them. Andrea Lagarde, The Latin Church in the Middle Ages, 1915, page 6. No man has the right to choose his religion. New York Freeman, Official Journal of Bishop Hughes, January 26, 1852. It no longer can be said today that the United States is a Protestant country. Cardinal Stitch of Chicago, quoted in Time magazine, August 5, 1955. Superior papal authority and dominion is derived from the law of the Caesars. Lucius Ferrus, in Prompta Bibliotheca Canonica. Out of the ruins of political Rome arose the great moral empire in the giant form of the Roman Church. A.C. Flick, The Rise of Medieval Church, 1909, page 150. Which brings us to the ninth characteristic mentioned in both Daniel chapter 7 verse 25 and again in Revelation chapter 13 verse 5, where we're told that this Roman Catholic beast would indeed rule for 1,260 years, and that the saints would be handed over to her. Revelation chapter 12 lays out for us the history of this prophecy when it talks about a great sign that appeared in the heavens. A woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. The 12th chapter of the book of Revelation speaks in detail of a very Jewish woman by the name of Mary, who, although was a virgin, brought forth a male child that the dragon, who is the devil, was seeking to kill. The dragon, who was the devil, had been long ago thrown down from heaven, and with him his band of angels, to do war against the offspring of the woman who had given birth to the male child. But it is written that the woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared for her by God that she would be nourished for 1,260 days. A woman is always depicted as the people of God, or the assembly of God in the Bible. The depiction of the dragon is clearly pointing to the historical Roman extermination of Jewish children, commanded by King Herod, who wanted to kill the Son of God when he was still a child in Bethlehem. And the 1,260 days points directly to the rampage of the Roman Catholic Church and her inquisitions, and the war that she had declared on true, God-fearing, Messiah-following, cross-bearing Christians. During the Dark Ages, the Roman Catholic Church murdered millions more people than Hitler ever even dreamt of. If you were caught even owning a Bible, even reading a Bible, your wife, your children would all be murdered and tortured in cold blood. Whole societies like the Waldenses and the Albigenses and the Hussites were murdered in cold blood by the Roman Catholic Church and her popery for simply owning or reading a Bible. And if you were to be found translating the Bible that at that time was in Latin into your own native tongue, they would take you into the town square, tie you to a post and strangle you while setting you on fire until dead. Let there be no mistake about it. History clearly proclaims it. The Roman Catholic Church has more blood on her hands of the martyrs of our Messiah than Hitler ever even dreamt of. She is indeed drunk on the blood of the martyrs of our Messiah, and her blasphemous teachings throw the Bible to the ground, along with the times and the laws of God Himself. As we continue to read down through Revelation chapter 12, we read about Satan, the dragon, being thrown down to earth by Michael and his angels. And it's written to rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to you, O earth and sea, for the devil has come down to you in great wrath, because he knows that his time is short. And in Revelation chapter 12, verse 14, we see that the woman was given the 2 wings of a great eagle so that she might fly from the serpent into the wilderness to the place where she was to be nourished for a time, times, and a half of time. When we read the phrase time, times, and a half of time, or 42 months, we should be able to deduct through biblical understanding and definition that these 2 lengths of time are equal to 3.5 years. A time times and a half of time gives us a total of 3.5 years, and 3.5 years is exactly equal to 1,260 days, if calculated properly. According to Ezekiel chapter 4, verse 6, we can clearly see that God says, and I quote, 40 days I assign you, a day for each year. And again, in Numbers chapter 14, verse 34, we can see that because the house of Israel refused to go in and overtake the land that God had promised the house of Israel, and because they had spied out the land for 40 days, God had promised to punish them for 40 years. Again, a year for each day. And this is exactly the amount of time that we are told that the beast would reign over the saints, which is exactly what happened during the Dark Ages of Roman Catholicism. Once again, it was in the year 538 AD that a decree from Emperor Justinian went into effect that assigned absolute preeminence to the Church of Rome. This is a historical fact as well as a historical marker. If we count 1,260 years from 538 AD, when the papacy originally took power, we're brought to the year 1798. In that very year of 1798, the French general Berthier marched his armies into Rome and pulled the Pope of Rome down off of his throne and carried him away into exile, where he died. And all of the properties of the Roman Catholic Church were confiscated by France at that time. As far as the world was concerned, the Roman Catholic Church had indeed been wounded in her head, and it seemed as though she were indeed finally dead and gone forever. After exactly 1,260 days in fulfillment of prophecy, the Roman Catholic Church lost her control of the world which once again points directly to Roman Catholicism and her popery as being the little horn who spoke blasphemies against the Elohim of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. What needs to be understood is that the beast of Revelation chapter 13 has everything to do with the beast of Daniel chapter 7. This beast is indeed a persecuting power, and is the very same exact power as described by both Daniel and John as the little horn. Both are symbolic of the Roman Catholic papacy, who is the only one who can possibly fit every one of the 9 characteristics given to us by both Daniel and John. Revelation chapter 13 verse 3 says, and I quote, I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. There should be no doubt about the fact that the Roman Catholic Church did indeed receive a deadly wound in her head in the year 1798 AD, when the French armies carried Pope Pius away into exile, after which he died. It was until 1929 that Mussolini executed the Concordat of 1929, with a new pope, once again restoring the properties that had been taken away from the church. It was at this particular time that the Pope of Rome was literally revived, and not only revived, but made king once more. The Vatican City was set up as a political sovereign power that to this very day still rules and reigns, and both her religious and political power have not only been restored to her, but have been advancing over time with tremendous strides ever since then. The very idea that the Roman Catholic papacy is indeed the little horn that is thought to change the times and the laws of God, and who has blasphemed and continues to blaspheme the word of God, should be of no surprise to us. I would submit to you, my friends, that the key to the book of Revelation is understanding who the beast of Revelation actually is. The key to the book of Revelation is understanding where the mark of the beast will come from. The key to understanding the book of Revelation is understanding who the beast power of the book of Revelation is. The 7 heads of the beast of Revelation chapter 13 clearly identify the 7 hills that the prostitute sits upon. But these 7 hills also represent 7 kings or emperors of Rome, just as we're told in Revelation chapter 17 verse 10, that had existed up until John's time. Up until John's day, when he received this vision, there had been 7 emperors of Rome. The first one was Caesar, who was murdered. Then came Augustus, who died naturally. Then came Tiberius, who was poisoned. And then Caligula, who was stabbed to death. And then there was Claudius, who was also poisoned to death. That's 5 kings who have fallen. And the one that was still there in John's time was Nero, who was a major persecutor of Christians during that time, and who also committed suicide. It's been written in our history books that Nero was impaling Christians while still alive, and wrapping them in wax and lighting them on fire to use them as Roman candles. Revelation chapter 17 verse 10 also tells us that another one has not yet come, and when he does, he must remain only a little while. There should be no doubt in our minds that this one that is yet to come will indeed be the last one, speaking of the most recent Pontifex Maximus, or Pope. And so the fulfillment of the prophecy found in Revelation chapter 17 verses 9 and 10 also explains itself in great detail. This next Roman emperor that is to come points directly to another Roman Catholic Pope who holds the title of Pontifex Maximus, that is still yet to come in the very near future, or may already be with us. We must remember that the Pope that we have today is indeed a Jesuit. And it's important to also notice that it's upon these 7 mountains, or these 7 kings or emperors, that the great prostitute sits upon, which reveals to us once again where her authority was birthed from. The papacy itself is indeed the extension of Roman power. The woman that rides the beast is indeed the religious Church of Rome that rules over the nations. The woman is indeed the Church of Catholicism herself, who has prostituted herself with the dragon in order to create a false religion that would fool, if possible, even the very elect. But we should not be so naive as to think that this harlot has not also prostituted herself with today's Protestant churches as well, who no longer today protest against anything, and have become themselves the daughters of their mother Church of Rome, keeping her first day of the week, Sunday Sabbath, and her Good Friday, and her Easter, and her Christ Mass. Just as the wicked rabbinical Pharisees of our Messiah's time had taught the doctrines of men, today's Protestant churches have also prostituted themselves with the whore of Babylon, and they have aligned themselves with the whore of Babylon's Sabbaths and the whore of Babylon's festivals and traditions. And just as our Messiah told the wicked Pharisees who were standing behind the pulpits of his time, they worshipped him with their lips, but their hearts were far from him, worshipping him in vain, because they were teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. The key to the book of Revelation is understanding what power on earth it is that is calling all religions back under her umbrella, so that she once again can rule the world just as she did back in the Dark Ages, when she was happily murdering millions of true Bible-believing Christians, like the Albigenses and the Waldenses and the Hussites, and all throughout her devilish inquisitions. The key to the book of Revelation is understanding the difference between the calendar that God has set for us according to his commandment and the calendar of Catholicism that we keep today in our time. The key to the book of Revelation is knowing the difference between the first day of the week, Sunday Sabbath, of the Pope of Rome, and the seventh-day Sabbath of Yahovah, God, that he says is a sign forever between him and his people, a perpetual agreement for all generations, forever. The key to the book of Revelation is knowing and understanding how the beast was wounded in its head back in 1798, and how it came back to life, and was resurrected in 1929, as prophecy tells us. The key to the book of Revelation is knowing and understanding that this beast did indeed have dominion over the saints of God for 1,260 years, from 538 AD to 1798 AD, which points directly to her as the whore of Babylon, drunk on the blood of the saints. The key to the book of Revelation is understanding the political power that this little horn power has, that speaks blasphemy against the God of heaven and earth, while speaking at the United Nations, and even in the very Congress of the United States of America, who is also becoming an image of the beast itself. The key to the book of Revelation is understanding repentance and turning back to our Father in heaven and to his spoken word, so that we're not guilty of worshiping another man-made Roman Catholic God who sits on a golden throne demanding the world to bow down before him and to kiss his golden pagan ring. The key to the book of Revelation is waking up, standing up, and realizing that true faith is not holding hands with the world and singing Kumbaya. It's not about being yoked together with unbelievers who have willfully and intentionally chosen to follow after the beast with both their hands and their minds. The key to the book of Revelation is knowing what the truth is and understanding that our Father in heaven is searching for those who will worship him in both spirit and in truth. And not man's truth, not the world's truth, not the truth of Catholicism or rabbinical teachings or denominational dogmas or man-made theology or philosophy, but his truth. He's looking for people to worship him in the only true truth that there has ever been. That is his spoken word that our Messiah became. The very same spoken word that our Messiah calls us to also become by picking up our crosses and following him and doing as he did and walking as he walked, not as the church walks, not as the world walks, not as today's denominational empires walk, but as he walked, always in obedience to his Father's commandments, laws, precepts, and Sabbaths. Our Messiah has already told us in the 23rd chapter of the book of Matthew, and again in the book of Luke, that not one crossing of a T or one dotting of an I of his Father's law can become void until two very important things come to pass. The first is that all things must be accomplished, and the second is that heaven and earth must pass away. And neither of these things take place or happen until the end of the age, clear at the back of the book in Revelation chapter 21. The key to the book of Revelation should be written across our hearts and in our minds. The key to the book of Revelation is having the ability to say, if you've seen me, you've seen my Father. The wicked underpinnings of Roman Catholicism have spanned across the face of the earth for generations, and it is by and large spanned across the face of the earth for generations because of the missionaries that the great United States has sent into the world to teach the first day of the week Sunday Sabbath of Rome, and her devilish Good Fridays, and her demonically inspired Easter Sunday morning, and the lie of her Christ Mass. Today's Protestant churches no longer protest against anything, and have indeed become the very daughters of their mother Church of Rome, keeping all of her designated Sabbaths and festivals and traditions. But what did our Messiah say?
You hypocrites, well did Isaiah prophesy of you when he said, This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. Matthew chapter 15, verses 7 through 9.
Our Messiah is our Passover lamb who died on Passover Day, not on some Roman Catholic created Good Friday. The Sabbath day of Yahovah God has always been on the seventh day. And although the calendar has been changed many times over, these calendars have only changed how many days were in a month or how many days were in a year. The 7-day cycle has never been changed or broken at any time in history. The second beast that we see coming out of the ground that looks like a lamb with 2 horns but speaks like a beast is indeed the great United States of America. There are no crowns upon this beast or its horns because there is no king. The 2 horns represent church and state, which is what the United States was founded upon. Nevertheless, the great United States is indeed becoming more and more each and every day an exact image of the first beast, who ruled and reigned with total and complete power and authority during the Dark Ages. And it will be the great United States that will help the first beast reestablish its world power at the end of the age. And this is exactly why we see the clay in the iron feet of King Nebuchadnezzar's statue. Although this second beast will ultimately help and prop up the first beast, there will be a resistance that will not allow the United States to marry the iron beast completely. As we have already shown, the infiltration of the Roman Catholic Jesuit army has successfully infiltrated the United States from her very inception. From George Washington and Abraham Lincoln on up, the Jesuit army of Roman Catholicism has been tenaciously pursuing the United States from the very beginning, because she knows that if she can manipulate and control the great United States of America with her secret Jesuit army, she will indeed once again rule the world just as she did back in the Dark Ages. And this has always been the objective of the first beast. And this is exactly why, as the first beast received its deadly wound in its head and Pope Pius was taken down by General Berthier in 1798, the second beast was already beginning to rise at that time. The United States is the only nation on the face of the earth that fits the description of the second beast down to a proverbial T. It was in 1791 that America was first recognized by a world power. The United States Constitution had been voted on in 1788, and the Bill of Rights was adopted in 1791. Even John Wesley, who was the architect of the Methodist Church, had written about this second beast who had to come after the 42 months or 1,260 days of the first beast back in 1754. Once again, John Wesley also knew what the prophecy had required, and that was that this second beast would arise after the deadly wound of the first beast according to prophecy.
Another beast, but he is not yet come, though he cannot be far off, for he is to appear at the end of the 42 months of the first beast. John Wesley, 1754, in his New Testament with explanatory notes, page 427.
In other words, a time will come, and I would submit to you has already come, when the great United States will begin to change its peaceful democratic tone. And under the influence of the dragon who rules the first beast, the United States will become like the first beast, because under the influence of the first beast, it will begin to compel worship, saying to them that dwell on the earth that they should make an image to the first beast, which had been wounded in its head, so that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. And this is ultimately where the mark of the beast will evolve from. This image will be like the first beast. This image of the first beast will speak just like the first beast. The religious and political bindings of this image that is like the first beast will rule and reign just like the first beast did, and it will do as the first beast has done. The mark that is to be given in the hand and the forehead in order to buy or sell will most likely be what one does and what one believes with their hands and their minds, which boils down to the worship of the beast. And the very sign that God had given his people through his seventh-day Sabbath will be the sign that God's people will be marked with, while the beast will ultimately force those whose names have not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world to worship its sign, which will not only be the first day of the week Sunday Sabbath created by Catholicism and her popery in order to emulate sun god worship. It will also demand that all of the commandments of the first beast, who is the little horn of Rome, to be kept in obedience. It is written in 1 John chapter 5, verse 3, that the biblical definition of the love of God is that we keep his commandments, and that his commandments are not burdensome to us. Therefore, if we are keeping the Pope of Rome's commandments, who is it that we will then be worshiping in the eyes of God? Who is it that we will be showing our love to? But there is one warning that we must leave you with. And that's the fact that there are many around the world and who are on the World Wide Web that are right now, as we speak, attempting to take the world's eyes off of Roman Catholicism and to put our eyes and attention on other entities that do not line up to the whole of Scripture. Once again, we must be keenly aware of the power and the long arm of the Jesuit army of Roman Catholicism and the worldwide power that she wields. Do not be fooled by these teachers and the devil's advocates who love to dress themselves up like angels of light. And above all else, let us always remember that when it comes to biblical prophecy, all roads do in fact lead to Rome.